Welcome to the Giving Back is Dead podcast brought to you by Scott Stover. Giving Back is Dead is a progressive, open forum for discussing next-gen giving to the arts and sustainable practices for nonprofits. For more information on Scott, myself, and our advisory services, please visit scottstoverinc.com. Welcome to Giving Back is Dead. Good morning, Vajra.
Good morning. Well, we're so happy to be here ahead of freeze. We definitely have been freezing the last few weeks. We've had torrential rain, so we're all cozy
with a fire
here with a fire.
All freezing.
And we're so excited to be doing this bi-monthly conversation where we're looking really at the kind of nitty-gritty day-to-day of what's happening in philanthropy and culture. And I think we actually have some really interesting topics. One, coincidentally, that actually starts with one of the first people you interviewed. And it was really interesting. I got to go back and listen and hear.
You did?
I did.
I'm impressed.
I did. And it was really interesting to go back and hear some of the key points he was thinking about when it was only 9 years old, and now coming up on, I think they're almost a decade.
Yeah.
And I think you really start to see the vein and impact, and it's so clear that the way they're tracking their impact and their research, I think, is really exciting. And obviously in this new report, you're able to see how they are speaking to a next-gen audience in terms of the way they format it, in terms of the key insights. I was able to not spend 4 hours trying to decipher it.
Yeah.
I spent 5 minutes.
So what Vajra's talking about is Y.ES.
Thank you, Scott.
Y.ES is a nonprofit begun by a friend of mine, Mario-Cader Frech, who is from El Salvador, and he began a nonprofit to promote and support initially artists from El Salvador and then artists from Central America. And basically, they're unknown. So he decided he would create a structure to support them. And what was particularly of interest to me is I always get this question from arts nonprofits: how can we have impact? They always believe that they can't, arts is not about impact. They cannot find figures to show the progression and what they're doing. And I tell them there is always a way to find some kind of impact figures. And Y.ES is particularly interesting because it gives us impact, and exactly what Vajra was saying.
And I think going back to how he discovered what that impact could look like and how it could translate to an audience that truly is the next generation is you have to go back to where it started. And being, I don't know if it was a temp, but he had a job at MTV where he really had to prove himself and what showcasing that impact could look like for a corporation. Now, for me, coming from the art world,
he was basically head of outreach for MTV.
But
so
before
he was trying
that,
to,
yeah.
That's what he did.
So
it was really and he was at the beginning of MTV.
Exactly. And I think that because he was there at the beginning, he was able to try and also be critical of what didn't work. And I think the art world has become too uncomfortable about being critical about methods. And that's why when you look at what he's done over the last 9 years, you can really see that he learned from the best within the art space in terms of understanding how the systems work. And then he really brought his own education and his own culture to the table. So
Absolutely.
It's unbelievably authentic to himself, which I think this next generation cares deeply about.
Authenticity.
If you think about Y.ES Contemporary and the ambassadorship they have developed of young patrons who are so excited to be invited on one of their trips. I mean, that was a key thing that our next generation is about experiences and feeling like they're a part of change.
A community. They also want to be part of a community, I think, as well.
Absolutely. And being able to go on a trip that, as he very clearly stated, it's the most expensive thing for development. However, it has the highest return.
But of course, he's coming from a point of view of a collector and someone who grew up in El Salvador and someone who's also a patron. So he understood what he wanted to see himself when he is a donor to a nonprofit. So he structured something that responds to all of who he is, really.
Absolutely. And, I would be curious within our own communities because I do feel that a lot of my peers have one person like him that has been that impactful individual that outside of an organization really help them figure out their footing. And you hear that so clearly when he talks about his first trip to Venice, and Amy Capolazzo looking at him and saying, hey, you actually can have impact. And it just started with $10,000.
Yeah.
And so it can start with
modest, which is one of the interests of this, because it's particularly when I'm talking to small arts nonprofit, they complain they can't come up with impact.
Yeah.
And all they do is say, we have an extraordinary program. And it's very clear to me there's always a possibility of impact. So maybe we should move on to our next topic.
Absolutely.
So our next topic is about a art tech app called Smartify. Smartify. And it happens to be that I know one of the co-founders, and I've been following it a little bit from a distance. And Smartify, I think that they began essentially, it was about using the smartphone, which is Smartify, and how we can use this, that everybody is can connect to art via the smartphone. And what they did initially, I think that you could take a picture of a painting in certain museums they've worked with. You took the picture, and then from the picture, you would get description, video, or mostly audio. Voila, that was the beginning.
Well, I think that it's a...
So you recently looked at it and explored it, and so tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are. So now it's developed further than just this picture, and they're working with an impressive group of museums.
Absolutely.
It's really, I'm fascinated by the progress they've made. And you know, what interests me is that it's really one of the only tech people trying to develop some product to work with museum assets.
Well, I think my biggest issue now, having a few years of working with tech companies and seeing where their interests lie, is that usually they're not thinking about really big issues that are affecting the art community, not maybe where the revenue, like the big numbers, where the auction houses and kind of the blue chip market, but really the education and the backbone that makes all of this so valuable. And why I think Smartify is actually onto something is by going and creating an infrastructure for disseminating education, not just through the app, through social channels. I mean, if you look at their Instagram, you'll see they're doing wonderful education pieces. This is where AI is unbelievably supportive. Yeah. And then you also hear about people that have special learning needs. If you're blind, being able to have a specially programmed tour for you in the way that you want to walk through a space, that app is actually doing fundamental building blocks to work with these institutions to take all of this information that they have within their archive and actually help it do more in a contemporary way versus sitting in a Google searchable engine. It's actually actively engaging with the audience. And that's something that I think museums for the last 20 years, as technology has started to come into the fold.
They absolutely haven't done enough.
And I don't think the tech world has understood what a benefit it would be to use these spaces as a place to better understand how can we inspire people. Look, when you get to sit in front of a prolific artwork, it can change your entire way of seeing the world. So imagine if they had the educational tools to really help people be able to get to that next level. And I do see, listen, all of these apps have shortcomings, but I would say that their approach to working with institutions and really learning about the pain points and how can they engage with the next generation. The arts budgets across the board are being slashed. Yeah. How is this? And I mean, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're creating great snippet history stories, highlighting these different institutions. And so I think that these, in the next 5 years, these are going to be some of the most important companies to these foundations and to these institutional spaces.
I totally agree. I thought you were more negative about it.
Well, I think that what happened after downloading here's my two things. The content they're creating on the institutions they're working with are brilliant. The interface of the app itself, because I have 6 different apps that are working, whether it's Seesaw or Art4, I'm constantly seeing like where there's room for improvement. And so I feel that I hope we can have a conversation with you, Smartify, because I'd love to give you my 2 cents.
I'm sure we can.
But I think that I think that their interface, you need to think about how we've engaged with Threads and Instagram and TikTok and so many different applications that the user experience has to kind of be like a game. It needs to really be.
Well, I think that was what was interesting about it. So we were talking about this because they've come up with one new and one recent product, one called Art Detectives.
Yeah.
I think that sounded really cool. How do you engage, how do you engage young people, children and the parents with children? And basically it seems inspired a little bit by gaming.
And I mean, it's like Pokemon Go.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's inspired by.
However, how does that translate? And that's where it's like
they're beginning. I think that it's going to be developed more. And then the next thing they're doing is this Museum Next.
Yeah.
Which is, you want to talk about that?
Well, you can start and give me your thoughts, and I'll.
Well, basically, you go into the museum and you can create your own tour using your smartphone. You say what interests you. You say how much time do you have and what period, and the AI then generates the tour for you. I think that's great.
It's brilliant. Again, it's the same thing about a kid who can read 2 minutes and then have AI develop something. Yeah. It's not quite there. And this is where I was speaking to earlier about someone who is deaf or blind, who these tools that are developing these interesting ways of specializing a museum experience for you is unbelievable. It's going to take tons of years. And I guess my hope is that Silicon Valley and all of these individuals, that we are at this complete precipice of how humans engage with technology and how we decide to either own it or be fearful of it. And I think that over the next 3 years, you're going to see so much focus on this issue of how much are we willing to bring technology that we don't know its real impact into our every way of existing. Now, I think people aren't aware that it already is in place.
Yeah.
And where it's like climate change. We can't fight it. This is the reality.
Yeah.
So I really do hope that there are, I think what Christie's Art and Tech Conference is doing is absolutely brilliant to bring people to better information, to not be fearful, to really utilize this cross-pollination of creative minds, because it's the engineers and the developers.
But what bothers me, it seems that all of the attention and all of the activity is to support the commercial side. It's all related to the commercial side. So what
people
interested
invest
me
where the money is.
Voila. It interests me about Smartify is we're investing in, I think, more about what art is really about. Like one of the things that fascinated me is what they're able to do is they create content from specialist curators and from the artist itself. 100%. For instance, when I went onto the app and they were talking about a Mark Bradford painting, and they have Mark Bradford talking about his painting.
100%.
And and I know him and I know the work, but I actually learned something that I hadn't heard him say before. And I think that the fact that we will be able to have everybody will have access to the artist explaining the work themselves, I think it's fantastic.
I think that what I hope, and those of us that are privileged to be able to have access to great information and know where to look, that's what we all hoped our college education would do for us. Yeah. And I don't think everyone has that privilege in this day and age. And I think this is where technology can become unbelievably impactful. I think about something like Henny Talks, which I think invests an unbelievable amount of capital in the quality and uniqueness of their interviews and asset building. I mean, art history is only as rich as it can be based on the information that we're able to record. And so this is where I feel like something like Smartify will be a pivotal turning point in how we are able to have access to the most important voices in culture. And again, I think it's about making sure that developers and the entrepreneurs of tomorrow see that as just as an exciting opportunity.
As we do.
and as they do in terms of figuring out when the art world will embrace blockchain, because they know what a huge revenue shift that will be. So I think that for me, that is that is both my hope and disappointment of kind of the tech space and the art world thus far. I do think we have amazing individuals that are changing that. DeVrang over at Christie's, I would say, is one of the people that has been pushing this agenda of bringing media, tech, and the art world together. And yes, there obviously always is we're a capitalist society, and I think that's not a bad thing, but I think what is so exciting, and I think this is a huge channel of what we are discussing on this newsletter and podcast, is that things can be profitable and impactful.
That's what I think. It has to be profitable and impactful. And I think that's one of the constraints of their current structure, is exactly that it's dependent on the museums who will actually allocate funds.
Yes.
And I think that will be a constraint. They have to find another way of moving forward.
And I think that's also on, we've never talked about this component, but boards, museum boards, and the role of those individuals to be able to bring those insights and the confidence of investing museum funds in places that will actually have a return. It's not only in the collection.
But the next gen likes working on educational.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Vajra.
It's always a pleasure, and make sure to stay tuned. We're going to have some wonderful conversations coming up in the next few weeks. During Frieze, we'll be interviewing, or I should say, you will be interviewing the new director of Artadia, Patton Hindle, and the founder of TR Lab, Audrey Liu. So I'm so excited to hear what insights you gained from them, and we'll be back in a few weeks. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you. Be sure to check out our latest podcast and subscribe to Giving Back is Dead.